Well, I'm actually thrilled that Asif decided to take a little bit of a left turn. Sort of going to tear up a little bit of what I was going to say and try and follow on what he said, because I actually agree, and I wonder if many of us in this room disagree. I had a little look at who was here, and I know many familiar faces. There's probably a lot more knowledge in this room. I'm not sure I'll tell you anything that's new, but so let's maybe have a little bit of a provocative discussion about the proposition and see if we can challenge ourselves. So I obviously had a daft job for the last 3 years if I was working on aid effectiveness. That's not the issue. It's about development effectiveness. It's about development success, right? So let's start there. And if, as Asif says, development success is not actually about what we do, but about what they do, and ultimately it's about moderately benign and stable states, then okay, let's start there. What are we going to do with that equation? And what I'm going to try and do is tie that challenge back to the discussion we're having in Washington right now. And I deeply believe that if we, the people in this room, do not have a very serious discussion around these issues over the next year, particularly the next few months, we will end up with a vector, with a direction that is going to take us down a road for a long period of time that we may like in part, but we may be deeply worried about. So I'm urging all of you to take up a challenge yourselves. If you think this is a meaningful discussion, what does this mean for me, and how can I push it forward in a way that I believe in? Okay, that's the big picture. Let me just try and first contextualize why I think what Asif is saying is deeply challenging and is, as you take it from platitudes to something more concrete, is not a discussion that will resolve itself easily in Washington. If we believe that we don't have the resources to lift people out of poverty, if we believe that every single success story, development success story, has been more about what they were capable of doing than what we were capable of doing, then it is all about ownership. And that word, frankly, has a lot of currency now. Everybody's using it. Nobody says ownership doesn't matter anymore. But it's one of those words that basically risks being nothing more than a platitude. And it means different things to different people. We're starting from a premise that we're engaging in countries who have demonstrated a failure to own their own development process in one way or another. And there are some people who, whether they say it or not, say, if the one thing we know about the countries in which we're investing is that they haven't been able to own their development process thus far, why do we want to give them more ownership? And that plays out in various ways. There are people who say, oh, it's great to talk about it, but if you mean handing over our American tax donors to unaccountable and corrupt governments, how are we ever going to be able to sustain this broader effort? And if ownership is fundamentally about power, that's what it really is. I mean, that is one of the key elements about in the idea of letting somebody own their own journey forward. It's about a transfer of power. And if we have development agencies in the United States that are feeling a distinct lack of their own power right now, and feeling that the power that they do have has been fragmented into so many different areas, how do you turn around to a USAID professional who feels they haven't been given enough power and say, you know, that last vestige of authority you have to decide on development directions with the 50 other agencies that are working in this town, we want you to give that away in the name of ownership to the people that you're supposed to be serving. So yes, we believe in it. Yes, everybody in this room has heard the term before, and yes, I bet all of us could make a decent argument on why it's effective, but on why it's essential to effectiveness. But how do we actually translate it into something that meaningfully contributes to the challenge that Asif gave us? That's something we've been struggling at Oxfam for a while. I think many of you have probably had our ideas about ownership foisted on you. I'm going to share just a very brief skeletal outline and then get to what I think is the interesting debate in Washington. We at Oxfam believe that if you want to take the potential platitude of ownership into something concrete, you have to ask three things. What are you actually trying to transfer? One, you have to transfer information. you have to tell people what you're doing in their countries in ways that they can use, and a government that is trying to live up to the standard that Asif is talking about can manage that information and plan for the future and build that compact with their own citizenry and say, this is what we want to do with those aid dollars. If we don't give them information that is both transparent and predictable, they can't make that pact with their citizens. And it's very hard for us to do that when our system looks like spaghetti. And it's very hard to do that when our appropriation system won't let you make promises beyond 1 year. So if we care about transferring ownership in the vein of information, we're going to have to address those challenges. The MCC tries to do that by making 5-year commitments and doing it in a way that is very transparent on their websites. I think they're positioned better than many other agencies because of that, to say they're trying to put governments in the lead. But USAID tries to do it through SOAGs. But are those SOAGs being respected anymore? It's a big question. I talked to some USAID professionals last night who said, you know, yes, it's the right idea, but they're often not worth the paper they're written on anymore in terms of us being able to bank on those commitments. That's the first challenge. Are we able to tell governments, people, what we're doing in their countries? Second challenge, the one we all struggle with, capacity. Are we actually able to transfer the power to manage your own development into their hands? And I mean, many of us have worked overseas with quote-unquote counterparts who said even that notion itself is fraught with problems because it assumes we start with no capacity ourselves. But there is something meaningful in the challenge. How do we know that a government that wants to live up to Asif's challenge needs to be able to do a couple of things, no more than a couple of things, but some very clearly understood things very well if we are going to increasingly allow ourselves to let them manage their own development. They need to be able to manage their own finances, be able to report to their own people, so on and so forth. We know we're working in contexts where they haven't demonstrated that capacity in the past. We want to transfer it to them. President Obama, when the first time practically he spoke as president about this, said, we haven't got the answer to this question. Last June, he said we're spending way too much money talking about capacity and we're not there. There's the bashing that goes on around the contracting, the bashing that goes on around the NGOs. We are not there in answering this question, but we know what we have to do, which is we've got to find a way to incentivize genuine capacity transfer as the real measure of success. The consulting firm or the NGO that is able to say, I didn't just check off boxes, I didn't just fill out an RFA, I didn't just do whatever the overpressed USAID officer asked me to do. I can actually tell you a story about people who don't need me anymore and who are running those functions without my help. And that's why I am making more money if I'm a for-profit agency or a more effective NGO if I'm in the non-profit game. The paradigm shift of what success looks like in capacity has to change. We know that Secretary Clinton is challenging both the for-profit and non-profit community to do that. We know the president has challenged us to do that. I don't think we've yet got very clear answers on how it's going to happen, but I think a lot of those answers are going to have to come from us. And I'll get back to you on why. And then finally, and probably the one that's most fraught with tension, are we really willing to give away the power and hand over the control of the development agenda to those governments who say to us, if you really want the kind of leadership that Asif was talking about, the only way to really learn is to do. Let us be in charge of our development agenda. Let us declare the priorities. If we say it's infrastructure, give us infrastructure money. Are we actually willing to hand over control of the development agenda to the people who we know are fundamental to its success? That is fraught with issues when you've got challenges in Washington in terms of Congress, who believes the best way to protect the effectiveness of our aid is through earmarks. It's fraught with the fact, and this takes me to the real thing I want to talk to you about, and the stories I want to tell you about from the field, with the fact that you've got different people at the table whose views of ownership mean that they come to the question of control with very different measures of success. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what that means in Afghanistan, and a little bit, if I have time, on Haiti, and you can tell me if I have time. So if you buy basically what we've been saying, which is it's not about us, it's about them, that's ultimately about ownership, that if you really want to think about things like sustainability and scale, you think about it in terms of countries, and that means governments and their citizens' ability to hold those governments accountable. How does a development professional think about that? How does a defense professional think about that? And how does a diplomatic professional think about that? Because that's the debate that's going on over the next year. Everybody's talking about ownership, but they mean different things. So here's how it plays out in Afghanistan. A lot of I think many of you have seen or read or heard about the new Afghanistan-Pakistan plan. There's going to be a lot more money for Afghan ownership. Some of it's going to go into Kabul, and that will be run largely by civilians, and it will go into ministries where we do the kinds of things that I used to do, where technical advisors support others. But a huge proportion of it is going out into the areas where the least development has happened and where the stakes are highest, which is the rural areas. Now here's how that plays out. There's a Humvee, because you have to move around in a Humvee in Afghanistan. And the person in charge of the provincial reconstruction team, there's lots of these all over Afghanistan now, the person in charge of that, who has been in charge of that since they were created in 2004, is a military commander. He's in the driver's seat, normally he. Sitting next to him, because we've now had this big innovation, is somebody from the Department of State. A foreign service officer is now in the passenger seat. They are the co-leads of the PRT. In the back seat, they're allowed in the car, is the USAID professional who's part of the PRT but takes their orders from the Department of State in the passenger seat and the military commander who's really running the show because they're driving. Beside them is a National Guard reservist who's there to provide agricultural expertise, also in the back seat. Now the four of them drive into a little village, and they've all been talking about ownership when they walk in, when they're driving. They come into the village and they're doing agricultural work because that's part of the mandate. How does the conversation go? Well, the USAID professional who's been basically fighting poverty for 15, 20 years wants to go find where the poor people are and have a conversation about what they need. So they goes and finds farmers and says, what do you need? Well, we've got this program. We think, if you can help us with pest control or some extension work, or we can think about a better crop rotation with some long-term assets over the next 5 years, we can increase our agricultural productivity by 15, 20%, and that will help us to stay off the poppy, etc., etc. Well, that sounds like a great idea, and let me talk to you about the kinds of resources we have, and you know how those conversations go. So they've got their plans where hopefully they've been listening to the farmers, that conversation's great, and they come back to the the Humvee, where this is the problem, where the commander who runs the PRT and the FSO officer, who's probably an incredibly thoughtful, well-informed, well-prepared person to be in Afghanistan, has been given the mission, what is in the United States' immediate interests? That's their job. So they went and talked to the most powerful person they could find in the village, and they said, what do you need with agriculture money? And the local chief said, what I need is a big cold storage thing right beside my farm. Because if I have that cold storage thing, all these farmers, which you need to keep under control so that they don't join the Taliban, are going to need me. You need me powerful. Give me the cold storage. You've got a pile of money, and it's either going to go to long-term agricultural development work, or it's going to go to that nice big cold storage and the empowerment of the local chief. That is the 3D debate that's going on in Afghanistan right now. And I can tell you, when the conversation happens in the Humvee, when they're on their way driving back to wherever their base is, it's very hard if you're in a Humvee to hear anything that's going on in the back seats. And that's going to be the debate that we continue to have over the next year as we try to tell the world we get what Asif is talking about. We get the fact that we can't develop all these countries. They have to develop themselves, and we care deeply about development. So that is my big concern. I watch this thing evolve as it goes into Haiti. There are some really thoughtful people in the State Department trying to make sure that we make the right decisions in Haiti, and they're talking about putting the Haitians in charge. But they are, again, diplomats, and they're asking questions from a diplomatic perspective. What's the measure of success? How can we get success in Haiti in a year? How can we make sure that the American people view Haiti as a success politically, because we need it? And the aid professionals who are going in there are increasingly being asked to serve that agenda, not the agenda of what are we going to do to get Haiti to meet Asif's test 10 years from now. So I feel like I've talked a lot. I had a couple of other examples from Haiti. I'd happily take them in. Okay, so well, just let me wrap up. Ownership, sustainability, effective states, none of those are in debate anymore, and we don't need to spend too much time at this high level. But many of them risk being platitudes, and unless we in the development community, who actually for one reason or another have made the commitment that we want the voices of those farmers in this discussion, and the women who are often not even there when it's, for me that's a personally important thing because I was in Afghanistan for so long and it was so hard. How do we make sure that in as every part of the government starts thinking from a diplomatic perspective, from a defense perspective, and from a development perspective, that ownership and putting countries in charge and finding the winners is the key to what US development ought to be about? How do we make sure those voices are involved? I think it's largely up to us, and so my call to all of you is keep the debate alive over the next 6 months and over the next year. When you see the presidential the outcome of the presidential study directive that President Obama will get from the National Security Council, when you see the outcome of the quadrennial diplomacy and development review, which is coming out, George, in a month, I think, the end of this month, I would urge you to give them a harsh scan with those questions in mind. Thank you.
I just want to tie this back to the earlier question on evaluation and to Stacey's comment back to me, because I think it's a really important debate. Stacey, I'm with you on maybe to be a little shorthand about it. If it's the Easterly worldview, which is we don't know everything you need to know when you go into a context, you need to learn where they're coming from. And then start your development on that basis, for the Sachs worldview, which is more like we can come up with the perfect village, and if it's done right and with enough resources, we can solve this problem. I'm more of an Easterly person. But here's the debate for the MCC and for you on this knowledge management stuff. If the development discussion in the United States right now is no longer ambiguous about what success is, and it's moving in the direction that Asif is talking about, if people are, and I believe they are, talking about Haiti, not as a bunch of discrete projects and programs where we can go in and learn how to do water and how to do healthcare and make sure that these are locally adjusted. But the bigger success story in Haiti right now is we have to fix Haiti. There are people in the US government who are saying that's success. And everything we do has to think about having Haiti work as a country, and that's the measure. We don't, at some level, yes, we have to apply the principles you're talking about in terms of knowledge, in terms of how we do it, but not in terms of working out what success is like. Meaning, we know we need a functioning, accountable, moderately benign government in Haiti over the next period of years that can manage its own affairs. Done deal. Everything that we evaluate from this point on is going to be held against that measure of success. And then you get into a discussion about what knowledge is most effective. Rather than what for many of us were weaned on in the NGO game when we started out, you go into a community, you don't even know what you want until you ask them first. And that's where I think the tension potentially is.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think that the people of Haiti disagree with you about the need for a stable and functional government? And if not, why factor them out of that priority setting?
I don't think they disagree. In fact, but I think the point is that 15 years ago, if we had had the debate, the Haiti discussion, Oxfam is now trying to provide water to 500,000 people in Haiti. We'll have that by June or July. We're providing to about 150,000. 15 years ago, if we had had the Haiti discussion in the United States, it would have been nothing more than Oxfam and a bunch of both non-profit and for-profit trying to accumulate that and at a disaggregated level talk to Haitians about how to do water, how to do it, and so on and so forth. But I get the sense that what the Obama administration is challenging us with is a new idea about what the goal is when we bring our development dollars to bear. And note, the Haitians don't agree that they want America to engage in a long-term and sustainable way as a partner for success. When we brought the ambassador of Haiti here to talk about what they wanted, he said, we gave you the Louisiana Purchase, so you need to give us a chance for the future over the next 30 years. That has to be the development project now. Don't be talking about 18 months. But the reason I think, so what I'm worried about is the distraction of the knowledge debate. Sorry to go on, but just here's the point for me.
They're setting up this commission now in Haiti, which President Clinton is probably going to have a key role in, where they are expected to deliver development success to the international community, primarily the United States, within 18 months. That's the challenge. And if we sit around thinking about, hold on a second, we should start, one, we need to just recalibrate the timeline and what's expected. And yes, of course we need Haitians in the driver's seat, but there's a different knowledge debate when you are asking the question, okay, we want Haiti in the right timeline to get there. How do we make sure Haitians are in the lead on the one hand? And if we go into Haiti with the old approach, I'm not saying you're proposing this, but there is a danger that people will hear it and say, we can't even start to work in Haiti until we first think about where the discussion is there. What I'm saying is there's a common set of assumptions about what success looks like, but we just have to make sure it's driven as a development story, not as a diplomatic or defense story. That's where I think the tension is. Thanks for the question, one. I think at some level we need to break it out into two different discussions. There is a lot of the reason we're in this room is that people have been on the wrong end of power and economic equations, end up living in poverty. We want to find useful ways to be helpful to them. A lot of the best work that we will do is just because it's the right thing to do with populations, with communities, with individuals who no one else has been paying attention to, and we apply all the principles that Stacey's talking about and many of us just know viscerally about listening, being humble, and working with them off their priorities. And that is, at some level, it is an attempt to fight back what happened as a consequence of colonialism, because for the most part, those populations got marginalized both during the colonialist period and continue to be. So we want to be in those countries that people don't care about politically. There's this other discussion that we have to get our heads around as development professionals too, which is that there's new money and new opportunities and new attention to the idea that development can actually further US foreign policy if it's done right, and can help to assuage some of the concerns around colonialism. And that makes things very uncomfortable for many of us who got into this business because we were concerned around the kinds of abuses that exist in the sort of colonialist model, because it involves sentences like, the United States has a national interest in other countries being stable, growing economically, and managing their own security. And if we as development professionals say, hold on a second, we'd like to jump into that discussion, we'd like it not just to be a diplomatic and defense discussion, but if you really want those countries to work, then we have a model for you. And it involves some economic ideas, political ideas, and security ideas, and it's very long term, but it's only going to work. You're only going to get your national security outcome if you allow us to treat this as a development problem. And then we find ourselves in something that sounds very like a colonial debate. We need all the countries in the world under the new national security paradigm to be moderately stable and moderately tolerant, and we want to be part of that discussion. And the secret to our success is not being co-opted in the ways that the questions are being talked about. So that we're there, we're pushing for development principles, but we don't become part of the problem. And that's going to be hard. If it's going to be quick, one quick comment from me is we are going to have to redefine our tolerance for corruption. There is no such thing as zero-risk development. If you want to do zero-risk development, go develop Finland. We are working in places where, yeah, maybe not Finland, maybe nowhere. But I'm really glad you're asking the question too, because I think until we grapple with the corruption issue, Congress is not going to buy the argument that ultimately long-term development solutions have to be in the hands of recipient governments. So we're going to have to increase some level of tolerance for risk and be a lot smarter about how we manage it. So if it is about development effectiveness, and we look at places like South Korea and ask why they were languishing at the same economic level as Sudan 40 years ago, but have radically changed the possibilities for their own people as a consequence of a development journey they've been on. And if it is, in the end of the day, non-negotiable that governments have to be effective And the citizens have to be engaged in the development project. And the relationship between them is the only thing that matters, or at least is the most important thing that matters on the development journey. Then we don't have to ask ourselves, what does success look like in any context? We know that's success, and we have to align what we do either to help states be stronger in responding to their citizens, or help citizens realize their own aspirations, both by the work they do themselves and how they hold their governments accountable. That's a non-negotiable. It's as important in Haiti as it is in Afghanistan, as it is in all those countries we are not talking about now, but if we don't think in those terms, we may be talking about for the wrong reasons down the line. Then the question is, how do we effectively help states work, and how do we effectively put citizens in the lead? And that, from this discussion, is clearly all about not thinking we have the answers. And that means we're going to have to take some huge risks. We are going to have to take precious US taxpayer dollars, and we're going to have to put them in the hands of governments and people that have not proven they can do it, but need to learn by doing. If we want them to lead, we need to let them lead. And that means an education process here around what success is ultimately about. Until we have a national strategy for global development in the United States that says this is what development success is going to look like everywhere, it's going to be very hard for the development professionals in the MCC or USAID or the State Department to wake up and say, I know what the end goal is, and I know how I'm working with all my colleagues in other agencies to do it. So I think we're going to get that strategy out of this administration. I certainly hope we are. But once we have it, then our task is to work towards those goals with some level of humility around what we bring in terms of knowledge to the discussion, but with absolute clarity around where we're trying to get to in the end of the day.